All right, I want to say a little bit about my real acting again. I have gotten a handful of notes, and I've received from New York some inquiries since they've now gotten several weeks of the tapes when I mentioned acting, or my real acting. One of them summed up an attitude that is not foreign to you or us, as I have done some things in the past, as one person in a quite sincere manner, and I responded partially in writing, and now they'll get this on tape. It was somewhat of a yellow circuit approach, and they were asking, in conjunction with their own observations and notions about what acting would be out in the ordinary world, movie, stage acting, about people like the method actors, for one example, attempting, as they have tried to describe it, to totally become immersed in the part. And the person who wrote me the note even mused over the fact of whether they go as far, he thought they did, is to try and to look at a part if you're going to play an overweight junkie in a movie. But maybe not only put on a little weight, but go hang around some junkies, and to see if there was anything in common, or at least if he could see one junkie somewhere that something seemed to strike a familiar note, and that, yeah, I could get into the way those kind of people stand when they talk, and there's certain ways that a lot of them seem to walk, and they got little gestures, and then maybe try to get into the kind of question as to what might make someone do this, what might they be feeling, and maybe talk to them. And we'll assume that even junkies nowadays in good metropolitan areas have been exposed enough to psychology, and I'm sure a few of them could say, well, I seem to have been very short-changed in close human emotion when I was in my formative years. So then the would-be method actor could then try and feel, maybe try and find some place in his past that he can still recall that he has these complaints for the way his mother treated him, or just maybe just one time she said, "You have been a grave disappointment to me, not at all like your older brother." And so then the person might try to magnify that, to try to hold that, so that maybe I'll have some feel I can put with my body. The general tenor of what they were asking came down to this. They got it into a yellow circuit kind of question, which is not inappropriate anymore. It's just that I do not go into this much as I'm talking, as you have now discovered. But the person tried to ask me that, all right, if I try and throw myself into a real act, this continual attempt to act, then what is left in me? Am I not going to in some way fall into the clutches and become no more than what would be this would-be method actor in life, that suddenly I'll become the part and I'm in no better shape than I was? All right, this kind of real acting, since several of you have asked me questions along the same line, I'm going to have to do that which I have always refrained from doing to a substantial degree, and that is describe, or at least hint to you, that it would perhaps be more under these conditions if you could do it. But that is about the only way I can give you any response. What I mean by real acting, of course, is just a name. There is a reality to it. But this kind of real acting would be that it would not be absorbing the actor's total awareness. It would not be, in fact, absorbing a real actor's awareness. Now, I'm saying real actor, I'm talking about people involved with this, not those on the silver screen and off Broadway. Once you can get a taste of what it is, and enough of you have had a taste, it'll make this worthwhile, whether all of you sense anything or not. It is not a matter that in some way I am now taking on an act, and the act is going to become mechanical, and so I'll just be something new mechanical. It is this kind of absolute fail-safe mechanism, because you cannot, by what I mean, real act unless you have the ability already to have a kind of ultra-circuit consciousness, and it stays simply aware that an act is going on. And connected to that, if you can hear a piece of it, is a kind of knowledge that there's an act going on, and it's for no particular reason. It just is. It is not the basis that I'm putting on an act to try and impress these people, which of course I'm not saying not to do. If you're in trying to make the sale, and a slight rub of the thigh, a wink, a little graft on the side, simply agreeing with the guy that, yeah, the Braves suck. Couldn't agree with you more, and you may have no interest in baseball. That is not what I'm saying, but the kind of thing that I have mentioned to you in the last several weeks, of a kind of continual act, even if you're standing around waiting for your car to be fixed, sitting around in the dentist office waiting for root canal work, doing nothing. As far as you can tell, you can get to the point, and once you taste it, as always, you can then throw rocks at my term of real acting, because it is not really an act. Of course, it is real, but it's not really an act. It is simply a continual feeling that you can produce that I could not be attacked, because right now I'm not what I always assumed to be me. I can't be offended, I can't be laughed at, I can't really be upset, because this is an act, no matter how subtle it is. And I've told you all it's required, it has to be just enough that you're continually aware that I am putting on an act. In fail-safe stage 2, you might say, it doesn't even matter how good you are. I don't even enter into it. And if you can get down to stage 2.5, it's not even necessary, truthfully, that you be putting on an act. It's to have the continual awareness that I'm putting on an act. Then if there was some way to judge it and I could suddenly pop out and say, wait a minute, that's not much of an act, it's not even any longer important. All there has to be is the continual awareness that I'm putting on an act, even if somebody, which they couldn't, but if somebody could come and say, wait a minute, that really does not even come up to the minimal level to constitute an act, what little you're doing. In fact, I can't even tell what you're doing. You look. But it doesn't matter, as long as you are aware of the fact, and I'm just putting these words on it, which is not the way it is, but as long as you're aware of the fact, standing around, whatever it is, that I am putting on an act. And it cannot be too subtle. There is no way to do it too little. It is a kind of ultra-circuit awareness, as I mentioned, which is beyond all the circuits that's already wired up. But it is a kind of continual consciousness that simply remains aware that the deeds are being redone. And it doesn't matter how subtly they're being redone. Of course, this is necessary in almost everything that's dealing anywhere near the line level of consciousness. I have made exaggerations of, saying to get in a position or to stand at least some way that you know that you would have never, that you do not normally stand. But to strike some kind of pose or just turn your foot sideways, do a kind of thing that, this is not me. I do not stand like this. I do not hold my head in this manner. I do not speak in such a way. But it can be so subtle that no one in the world knows you're doing it but you. But if there is a continual awareness that I'm putting on an act, and I repeat again, since I got a few of you that time, if it could be proven that it's not even observable, that no one can tell, it doesn't matter. If you weren't actually doing it, it wouldn't matter. As long as you had the awareness that I am putting on an act. Just be sure to give me it's not rolling now. It are. All right. Paragraph 2. Heading, homeostatic validity. Now this will sound as though, to begin with, that in some way I might be talking about, again, the nature of life at a level that psychology and religion and would-be mysticism will not be reaching until we're, at least some of us, are gone. But I also note, as always, this is not just some external notation I'm making, because it hits right at the heart in one specific area of what seems to be the inexplicable, the disturbing relationships between people. I'm going to present it on the basis, to start with, of life in operation again. And it has to do, I'm going to select a kind of everyday example. That it seems as though men are continually overdoing when they attempt to change. Now, if we had a voice in the body of life somewhere, which of course we do, and it comes out as being a person, and those of you who can find a similar voice within yourself. But let us say that we have a person that shows up on a TV talk show or writes a book, shows up for a lecture, and it's a new organization. And in fact, I just heard of one. It was new to me. It was something, I think the name was Spenders Anonymous. It was this person who had started an organization for people who overspend, compulsively go into debt, to the tune of wrecking their homes and their lives. And this person, I shouldn't do this, but it happened to be a woman. He made me say that. I didn't want to point that out. That's all right. 90% of Alcoholics Anonymous are who? Non-women. And almost 98% of dumb Anonymous are of the masculine persuasion. At any rate, the person gave a nice, I guess, attempted heart-wrenching explanation about I was a middle-class person. We had a fair income. I had several credit cards. And I had check writing privileges. We had an account. And I did not think I was spending any more than anybody else. And then she went on to describe, from one viewpoint, that is, from one voice somewhere in life's body or within you. Could have said, wait a minute. You know, no one should have gone that far. The person described to the point, middle-class person claimed to be finally with $50,000 of bad checks floating around, trying to kite them from one bank to another, trying to run one credit card to another. And there's a voice in body's life, in life's body, that comes out through many people that could have heard that, and you should be able to hear what I'm about to speak for that voice. They say, good grief, how could anybody go that far? And then to sit there and say, well, and they finally had to arrest me, a middle-class, decent person, never in any trouble. I was suddenly, almost just before I knew it, there I was being fingerprinted, locked into a cell. And it was then, like my moment of epiphany, that it struck me that something here, my darling, is amiss. All right, there should be a voice somewhere that would say, good old cynical voice if it was a human. But then those of you with on your toes tonight, as you should know, it's simply a part of body's life, also speaking, but it is always there to turn around to people and events and almost proclaim extreme dumbness. How in the world could you get in the position, being a middle-class person, your family income's only $27,000 a year, and you're suddenly $50,000, how $50,000 of bad checks, unpaid credited card accounts floating around, and you're going to tell us that they had to lock you up. Sheriffs have been after you, they've been trying to catch you, and they had to lock you up. And then you say, I sat down in my cell and cried, and then it was suddenly, like a flash, it came to me, I've been overspending. Another obvious example I should point out, what used to be called drunks before the day of the alcoholic. You know, a man, the streets now and lecture halls and bookstores are filled with stories of people who said, yes, I was an advertising man, I was a computer designer, I was doing $80,000 a year, had a new car, had 3 girlfriends, hung out with all my friends, had stimulating conversation every afternoon at the bar. Suddenly I began to realize, I would look back and someone would mention about my birthday party last week, and I would suddenly realize that I had no memory of the last 2 weeks, and yet I'd been operating And the interviewer or the person admits, and well, were you just a social drinker? Well, yes, I thought so. Well, how much were you drinking? Well, it was somewhere. It was between 2 and 3 quarts of gin a day. And then there'll be a voice somewhere. As how in the world, you, a man with a college education, sophisticated, that you have suddenly, up for several years, drinking over 2 quarts of booze a day, and then you're going to tell me that one day it kind of struck you. That is, the day you totaled your Porsche into a telephone pole, hit another car, put people in the hospital, they arrested you, you lost your job, you lost everything, and then you're going to say, then it hit me, perhaps I have a drinking problem. I'm getting to something. There is a voice in life's body that all of you should feel some recognition of that says that. How in the world could you let this thing go that far and then sit there with a straight face or a straight typewriter and tell me this story that it went so far? Even I, as dumb as I am, my kid brother, my Uncle Elmer, who's really dumb, even he would have known something was wrong before this happened. How could you let this have happened? What would be the alternative? All right, let's take another part of life's body that speaks in this manner, or would. I dare say you've never heard it expressed in words before that I'm about to put on it. But if you followed into that, you should be able to hear this. It makes sense. Just life never speaks this vocally. What would be the alternative? All right, this voice, for which I am going to overtly speak, would have said this. All right, there should be, or there must be, it's logical, it is mathematically supportable. If things are going in a way that it seems to be one's personal life, there would seem to be going in a way that they're getting into a kind of recoiling mode. They're getting in something that's going to be not only unprofitable, but perhaps self-defeating to the point that it could be terminal. All right, if things were going to move in a reasonable manner, even if people here and there, obviously, seem to get off on the wrong foot periodically, it would get to some point that you could identify it. That, wait a minute, this has gone far enough, now is the time to change. Now is the time to sit down, take stock of the situation. It's just obvious that here is a plateau, here is a turning point, here is the stable place at which to stop this unprofitable course of action and go somewhere else. Does anyone, including the few laughs I just heard, does anyone get a glimpse of the fact that things cannot work that way? All right. Let's go back to the obvious. Things do not work that way. Life cannot, based upon the only way it's conceivable here in words, I have presented to you about the 3 events, the 3 possible flows, the continual confluence and confrontation of all of this could not move. It would go into absolute gridlock. Or if you can turn that out inside out, would be the same thing, which I could describe it in that manner. But if things moved in a certain way that would seem to be flowing, let us say, primarily in a kind of C event pattern, and then it seems as though, without any doubt, as far as you can see, this has turned into almost its own opposite. It is no longer creative and positive. It is now detrimental. It is dangerous. Although theoretically you might now be saying, all right, everything must be cut down for something to be rebuilt. But still this voice that is never spoken, that I put a tongue on it for, could say, why cannot things, instead of making these overlapping flows in one direction, and then it's as though life, well, that is the people, as life goes this far and then has to say, wait, I almost fall off the deep end in one direction and then have to try and backtrack. That surely is not the most profitable way. It should get to a point and understand we have reached the ultimate in diminishing returns. This is no longer profitable, it's no longer fun, it is no longer beneficial. Now is the time to change. That is not the way things work. And from that view, they always have to get overdone. It always has to go too far, because if it did not, things would not be stable. Life simply cannot move up to an immediate, stable place of change. A quickie. This voice that I gave utterance to, of decrying humanity always overdoing. Now, somewhere along the line, if I don't go any further with this in the immediate future, some of you should then ask yourself the question, from what area of all three possible event patterns and modes could this voice be coming from? And any of you who got that good, the first two that you always jump on, I might suggest to you, almost don't make sense. Could you finally be getting close to an area where E might actually finally speak and nobody's ever heard it? Another aspect of what I am mentioning is I have pointed out, and all of you have some passing taste of the validity of this. I know how fleeting it is, and I know that on some nights it sounds as though I have gotten into a realm that makes science fiction sound like a Donald Duck comic book, but I am speaking about something very specific, and something that is within everyday affairs. But there's one piece I know many of you, or all of you, have had some glimpse of feeling like that, yes, that's true. You just can't remember it, and that is that life must have resistance. Man must have resistance. Trees must have resistance. Seeds in the ground. Everything must have resistance to grow. That is a fact. It's not even metaphysical. But let me stretch it further than I have ever pointed. It must have stability. I mean, resistance, even if not for immediate growth, for stability itself. Up to this point, I'm not inclined to ride this road very far tonight. But there are many instances that all of you, or most of you, still feel, and some of you write me notes, of still feeling as though there's something you're missing of supreme importance. And that your awareness, your own voices of all nature still cry out continually about the injustice, the hunger, the mistreatment of people in the world. That although, yes, trees must be cut down to get lumber, to build hospitals, to treat injured children. And yes, you must plow up fields and kill worms, and you must kill insects to raise food, to feed the starving. It is not at all a simplistic manner. Ordinary consciousness cannot even begin to do it. To see that life and everything else being in life, that there must be resistance. There must be that your forefathers and the voice of your forefathers still speaking through your own genes, talking about evil, that there must be what they would have called evil. There must be resistance to growth, for growth to take place. But on these continual occurrences that I know everyone is almost strangled with for a long time, of looking at a situation and you cannot find any way in which there seems to be growth at work. You can't even perceive growth being a possible outcome of this. Trying to perceive 10 years from now, it just seems as though this is a dastardly deed. It seems as though perhaps these circumstances, the people involved, it just seems to be a personification of destruction. Resistance is absolutely necessary, if not for immediate growth, or if not for growth ever. It is necessary for stability. How about a fencing allegory. Or you could take prize fighting, you could take gymnastics, but how about fencing? To attack and receive no parry, receive no response, you can almost kill yourself. If you try and attack something, and take attack in parentheses, any possible flow of what would have seemed to be, perhaps a would-be, positive action by some segment of life's body, and you attack and there's no one there. I assume many of you know as much about the would-be reinterpretation of the so-called mystical martial arts, in the ways in which they're now claiming, some of these Americans, that they know or discovered some mystical secret behind the fact of attacking someone and the ability that you're supposed to develop is to almost make yourself become part of the attack. It's to flow with the attack. In other words, offer no resistance. And so the person attacking you ends up breaking their own neck, at least laying themselves flat. And there you are, brushing yourself off, and checking your nails, and everything's fine. You cannot stay stable if you attack anything and there is no parry, if there is no response, if there is no resistance to it, there is no stability. You can try this any way you want to. You can try it with skating, if you want to carry it, if you can see what I'm saying far enough. You can try it arm wrestling. You can try it standing on your own head. But with anything else you would do with someone else, and of course then take it very quickly, within milliseconds, beyond what seems to be my physical descriptions, into outside the minds and the assembly line, up into the blue and the yellow stories of the corporation. When there seems to be an attack, if there is no resistance there, you're going to be off balance always. All right, beyond the physical example, I'll take it outside the red story. All of you should be aware of this, how almost inescapable it is to become infuriated with a child who won't respond. Did you break that? Now, I know you did, but I just want you to say you did. Now, I told you not to play with it, and I told you I was going to spank you. Now, just admit it. There's nobody in the house but you and me, and I didn't break it. I know you did, so admit it. And the kid just stands there. You say, all right, look, just admit it. Just say I did it, and this one time I'm not going to whip you. I'm not going to punish you. But by God, just say you did it. And the kid goes. And all ordinary parents are close to that point. All right, to dig up our old friend, the man called Jesus, from that story again. But I'm going to milk that story from every possible direction. This judge / attacker says, you've been accused of such and such. Is it true? All right, look, we're in a hurry. I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't care whether it's true. I mean, I'm not that interested in this court. My attack is not that serious. Say it's not true, and I'm not going to call more witnesses. I don't give a damn. Just say it's not true. I don't care. Just say it's not true. Now, you could say there were not physical children involved, but there is a kind of built-in, and forget, of course, any kind of would-be psychological explanations, but there is a built-in little area that's in charge of being infuriated when it receives no resistance. All of you have been through it, either with children. All of you have got that button. It is in the wiring system. It is within the wiring system, the nervous system of life itself, that it fully understands, more so, of course, than humanity does, that not only is growth not possible without resistance, and not just physical, but just the resistance of, no, I didn't break it. You know, forget whether you broke it. No, I didn't break it. Rather than saying, you're accused of so-and-so. Is it true? Heavens, no. And the feathers are coming out of the cat's mouth. He says, no, I didn't eat it. No. But there is a place built in to be infuriated to receive no resistance. Did you do it? Oh, come on, well, say something. It leaves the organism off balance. It can be a very potent weapon that in times past I have given a few of you temporary tasks along these lines in specific situations, and it can also be dangerous. Of course, those who understand it would not use it in a way in which it would be dangerous, but I am pointing out that life itself understands it, and it punishes itself. That it understands that not only is growth not possible without resistance, but even overall stability is not possible unless you got resistance. So some of what seems to pass historically, some of it seems what to pass for your own instant consciousness at the ordinary level, there being occurrences and situations in life which by any stretch of your present yellow circuit capacities, you cannot see any potential positive purpose for this. It does not have to be always that it's for growth. Life has got to stay stable. And resistance is necessary. Or back to your forefathers, what they were trying to call evil. Evil is necessary not just so that good can finally win, but in some instances it is necessary just to keep good alive, to keep the organism stable. Let me stretch it one little bit further. Can you perceive this? That conflict equals health. Or if I had wanted to be a little more stringent when I started that little instant gem, I could have said warfare equals health. And yet, there's that part of body's life of which everyone is aware, and of which almost everyone who is initially attracted to such as this believe is the most important voice in life and in humanity, crying out for peace, brotherhood, love. It seems to be the basis of all the religions. But if you want to talk about health, the total health of life, which of course then equals the overall health of humanity, it would not be peace equals health. It is conflict equals health. Life's corporation, the total corporation of life, would have one product, of course, and that is growth. But it is growth through diversity. It is the dispassivity of life, not what seems to be the most vocal part of life, or that which seems to attract those that would be religious, would be constructive and creative. That is, we have got to turn everything into a homogeneous society wherein we all understand, even if you're red and I'm green, and I'm an X religion and you're a Y religion, and you live on this side of the world and I live here. Somewhere we've all got to get together, and if we can just scrape out all the prejudice and the barnacles off of our hulls, we'll understand that, hey, we're all the same all over, and we'll suddenly all hold hands and dance around the maypole and etc. Now, of course, the ordinary consciousness, it is still, you might say, easy enough for me to say that cannot be the way it is, and things be healthy. And so until you understand that, let's go back to the dirty level. That ain't the way it is. How do you explain that? Unless, of course, you're a religious person. Then you explain it because man's not doing correctly. Wherein I am pointing out to you, and some of you are beginning to see quite clear, that man is doing absolutely correctly. But what is ordinarily pointed to and referred to as conflict. Conflict equals health. And life's corporation, were it not so diverse, if it got down to one product, all right, 4 or 5 products, it got down to peace. I'm just using ordinary terminology like some of you might use in lesser moments. Peace, fellowship, goodwill. Well, that's 3 good products. If it got down to those three products, life would go broke. The corporation would fold. When your only product is growth, growth can only come about not only through resistance, but it has to be through diversity. Yet again, I repoint for you that which is always past for would-be religious or mystical thought, not only out there, but in you, is that in some way we're going to clean everyone up. We're going to chip away all of these ill-based opinions, which you can obviously identify, because most of them conflict with yours. It's the old idea of paradise, that we will all be the same. Everybody will finally be turned into the same color, same kind of hair, more or less the same body look, so that nobody's too fat, nobody's too skinny. There's nothing to make you stand out. And of course, when the head gods come through, everybody says the same things, like, how you doing, chief? Or when you're all singing around and the gods are not there, nobody ever argues. Everyone is in favor of the Lakers, the Mets. Everybody, bets on Dallas. Dallas always wins. They win every game. They win the Super Bowl every year. The Mets go undefeated year after year. Everybody becomes a Republican. The Republicans win all the time, so everybody's a Republican. You sit around in paradise. There's no chance, not only of no fist fight, but no disagreement, because everyone there is a Republican. Everyone's for the Rangers. Everyone is for the Cowboys. But you understand, that dream of what is called paradise is death. It would be the cessation of any growth. It would be the cessation of any conflict. Of course, the fear is still built into life, the discomfort which everyone experiences, to go way back in our discussions, that nothing being stable, ordinary consciousness does, quite properly, quite predictably. Once you see it, feels as though I am standing in quicksand, and I'm surrounded by infidels, I'm surrounded by potential mad people. This whole thing is coming apart, and what few reliable standards of morality, acts of decency that there were, which of course in everyone's life they were back about the age of 20 or so to 25. But now, my God, just look. It is a dangerous place to live. There is nothing upon which we can depend. All of our heroes, all of our gods are being laughed at. They're painting graffiti on our temples. What used to be held sacred is now satire. That is ordinary consciousness' viewpoint. And it helps the wheel keep rolling. It helps everybody die on time so that somebody else can take your place. But conflict, to use humanity's a great term, it covers about all of it. What they would call conflict absolutely equals health. I wish you people would quit being silly. Along similar lines, everyone has heard the term, quote, aging gracefully. But do you understand or get a glimpse of the fact that everyone is programmed, on the contrary, to age ungracefully? That everyone is programmed to become resistant to the areas of life that are now growing right past you in horizontal time. Then I would refer you back to a little piece of something I mentioned last week. It's by your own existence right now, the way in which you are aging. That doesn't matter, all of you are old enough. We don't have any teenagers in here. But nowadays, if we had teenagers, if they were interested, they would already be over the hill or they wouldn't be here. By your own existence right now, that is, of life's perception primarily being of itself at the highest level through human consciousness, If life just had you, what is its perception of itself? If it had you at your ordinary level, would life be going around contemplating on a fairly regular basis suicide? Would life have the blues to the point that you sometimes feel as though you cannot even get out of bed? Or if it just took a reoccurring part of your vocal self running static daydreams, would life's daydreams then be that by God it is falling apart, I'm coming apart? There's every chance in the world, based upon ordinary statistics, the most up-to-date, that I'll get mugged. I may get, within the next 3 months, I'll surely get physically attacked within the next decade. And there's a 1 in 7 chance that some member of my family will kill me before the age of 60. I read that in Reader's Digest, by God. If life's perception of itself was through you, how would it perceive itself? Right, after all the effort I've gone through to get most of you to the point of getting glimpses that this thing is growing and that everything that happens is ultimately working at different tempos, but is ultimately supporting the expansion. Beyond all that, when you're back at line level, when you're back in the hands of not acting, and you're back to being you, and you suddenly, not just instantly, but say for a day, a week, that you stayed at that level and you were then life's consciousness of itself, you might kill us all. How would you explain this to yourself? If life's consciousness of itself was no more than yours of you in life, could that indeed stop life? Could that indeed make life commit suicide? Could it send life into a mental hospital? Could it at least get life on booze or Valium to where we all got disoriented? Now, of course, as you should see, until sometime, and it's not in the near future, life is full of people, all the way from having periodic bouts of the blues to those who are having to be locked up, as they say, for their own safety. And so within life's corporation, there is that diversity. There are still people killing each other. There are still people trying to kill thousands of people, trying to take over external power. It's still going on. So it's still necessary. But it is all a kind of balanced resistance in a trilateral world. But if we could artificially interfere with that, and your perception at ordinary line level consciousness became life's perception, what in the hell would that do to life? Then, what in the hell does that do to you? It is necessary that somebody, some part of life's body do that. But people up until now have taken it, as I've drawn you out these several different strains of my particular history, have blamed it on gods, mythological gods, then blamed it on battles between one god and one anti-god, and now blaming it upon the sins of our fathers, that is, psychological traumas. But somebody is still having to play out and speak for those areas of life's body. But you are certainly getting in a dangerous position insofar as wasting all of my energy with this, to allow yourself to fall back to any degree, any more than just a fly buzzing you, you're good and sweaty, to feel as though any of this is personal. That, yeah, Thursday night just sometimes, and some of the tasks, and just being around the group and being around him, just my life is not the same, but still twice a week, God, I get the blues. I always say that a picturization speaks more than 1,000 droplets. As I try to give you a little piece of it right quick, I'll touch on one more time from last week, and I'm not continuing to drag religion into this for any particular reason other than to get you to see the purposes that religion has served and how this has got to be expanded, and how you got to be able to expand it even from your forefathers' genetic voices still talking in you. That heretofore it was always an idea that in some way man has got to please God, that there is some kind of God outside this system, and he or she or it is standing there and periodically looking in and very concerned over what you are doing and continually judging you that that's not quite good enough. But once you begin to see it in a certain way, then you can try and remember the question I present to you again tonight. Instead of calling it life, the body of life, which I'm giving you a more proper description. But if you went back and called it, all right, a God out of here, and I said, all right, his only conception of himself is humanity's consciousness of itself. And if we take you, and suddenly you're no longer just one among the many, you're no longer a faceless little peon out here in his serfdom, you're it. And we could suddenly shoot you out of here in a slingshot, and you hit God's consciousness, and his consciousness was now what you are. Now you have changed the picture that in some way humanity has got to please God. What if it's vice versa? What if it is tied in its two parts of a triad? You cannot separate the two. Of course, I shouldn't leave this as being some kind of rhetorical question, because I told you correctly as far as words go last week that life's supreme perception of itself is through human consciousness. And if you were it for an hour, if the totality, within the very small confines though they be, of your line-level consciousness of yourself and of life, if life itself, if that God outside of here was suddenly saddled with that, and that's all he had, what would you have done to the rest of us? Those who knew would certainly try to get their hands on you. Those who knew would be finding a way to get into God's nervous system, and we would pull you out. If you want to talk about instant death, I was going to use a lot of the questions from last week and tonight. There's several, whether I read them or not. They've come in. I'm going back and remind you of something. I think one or two of you, I wrote a note back and remind you of this, but I'll say it again. The questions had to do with, I am in the external world, in my business or somewhere. I'm having to deal with a person that's driving me to distraction. I don't know what to do. I don't seem to ever do anything right. I seem to have stepped into a place where I'm not what they were expecting, and etc. Now, all of you by now should be sane enough to be able to use some kind of control over this. But let me remind you of reversing the current on people. That is, of doing the outright imitation of apparently giving people back what they seem to be putting out. That is a surefire, non-conditional method to, one, immediately get their attention, and to, two, make them stop doing it with you. Another aspect is this, that nowadays, any of you who need to be reminded of this, or some of you may have never heard it put in that way, but I would put that, really, try that as a second step. Go in now and let's go to acting, is to try and absolutely put yourself by real act into the position that seems to be expected / demanded by what's going on. Is simply willfully conform to it. Now, whether you do it for an hour or a day, then you can do stage 2. As those that you seem to be in direct conflict with, you just start imitating. Reflect them back. And I repeat once more, you have got to be sane enough now to understand some control over this, because it is foolproof. So you've got to be that sane, or else you've got to be prepared for stage 3. That is, you might be back with the monads. But that person will forever, whenever they hear your name, their nervous system will come to attention. And they'll look around and make sure you're not there. And if your name's ever brought up and your negative gossip starts, they will not become involved with it. On the contrary, they may say, well, in a strange way, I always liked that person. We're going to do some of the questions. If we use more energy than necessary by reacting mechanically, how does one conserve energy by acting? It will absolutely free energy. We're talking about for us now. Ordinary people, it's moot because they wouldn't do it. If they tried it, it'd just be a passing phenomenon. But it is, by real acting, you are absolutely freeing energy in that all mechanical activity of whatever nature, and that is simply you being you, is using up all MV12 that's available. That is a part of the stability that psychology now would speak of as the norm for a fairly well-balanced personality, that you can be depended upon to be you more or less from day to day. And of course, it's the kind of stage that many of you went through originally. Some of you, I guess, still have flashes that this is almost about to drive you to the point that some days you wake up in the morning and you think, boy, what a great day, and you think, wait a minute, who am I? It is only those that never have the, I'm not talking about the mechanical feeling of who am I, I'm talking about the real feeling. But it is only those out in life that never waste any energy that, yes, I know who I am. Which from another viewpoint, some of you may recall one time in passing, I pointed out that from a certain viewpoint, they're life's most faithful servants. Those that would never entertain for 1 second any kind of apparent supernatural, religious, metaphysical, philosophical, take the whole range. That to them, I'm having too much fun. Fill up my gas tank, find me another sexual partner, bring on the caviar. Sleep 4 hours a night, seem to have been born smiling and happy, and seem to die smiling, hollering, hey, it was a good trip, checking out. Which, of course, is a mechanical type to which almost anyone that becomes exposed to them, not excluding people attracted to this, think, wow, if I could just be like that, hey, fuck being metaphysical. It is a necessary, although a fairly small part of life's body, as you might note. But I could point out that from a very real viewpoint, they are life's most faithful servants. And from another viewpoint, they are dangerous. It seems to me that as soon as a person says, I'll never do that again, that they had better watch out because it's going to fly in and hit you right in the back of the head. All right, yes, yes, and yes squared. Must I remind you, although the person didn't use the words, is do not, once you know how, do not ever tell yourself anything, but specifically the examples I start using, which are the most valid and you can get your hands on it, don't ever tell yourself, all right, I'm going to quit eating bread with my meals because I want to shed a little weight. Don't ever tell yourself that. You can decide to do it and not say it because the person is right. You're setting up. Nothing will happen without resistance. And at the ordinary level, to ever say, well, I've been eating too much, I'm going to cut down. It has its own built-in resistance, or you would not be saying, I've been eating too much. Things are going in a certain direction, they had the resistance. You're continual feeling that I eat too much. All right, it's gone too far. I can't get any of my pants on. Now we're back to that kind of voice that I spoke for originally. A voice could say, well, look, when they got a little tight, which was when? About 4 months ago, why didn't you cut down then? Oh, I don't know. But now I can't even get them together. I just suddenly realized. Just suddenly, overnight, you put on 30 pounds. But you're back into another bilateral game of resistance to say, all right, it's gone far enough. Now, I know that it appears otherwise. It appears that you have to make decisions, And if any of you had something that was really, if that's the way you think you have to do something right now, I'm not telling you not to do that, but I am telling you that is not the way to do it. The way to do it is, all right, I'm not going to do it, but I'm not going to admit it. And even if the voices say, are you actually going to quit eating bread? Don't give them any answer. Just don't do it. Here's one related back to action and thinking of action. Continued colon. The question is, what is fear of failure? Is it just thinking about action? All right, action itself can have no, quote, fear of failure. I mean, not in some psychological sense. We're taking that way that people, they would say, here's a type, or maybe I'm a type, I have a fear of failure. Action itself can have no such fear. Now, it could have a fear of being hurt over some dangerous act. If we start saying that in some way you decided to go out and take up skydiving, that you'd met a girl and you were trying to impress, and she was involved, and you got up and said, "Help, no problem, I'll do it." Took a few hours, they instruct you a few, took you up in the plane. All right, action itself, that here you are and it's your time to jump. Regardless of whether the people that talk to you and the guy flying the plane or the one testing the weather, where they know what they're doing, the degree of danger, it is still that action itself, the first time, could quite properly feel danger into the act itself. It's not fear of failure in some way, that I'm going to jump out and I'll look stupid when I crash and splatter myself, and then she won't go out with me. Action cannot have fear of failure, it can have fear of the act. But then get into not action itself, but the thinking of action. And that would be the only dynamic that could actually experience, quote, a fear of failure. And I could refer you back to something else I haven't mentioned in a while. The fact that all apparent negative human feelings must have the support of what? Words. That to have a, quote, fear of failure, it has got to be involved with thinking of action, because it has got to be supported by words. But once you're involved with the act or an act itself, action can have no fear of failure. It can only have what to it, and it might be correct, a proper fear involved with the potential danger of the act. Not over the fear of failure, not how I'm going to look stupid. It's how I'm going to get hurt. That is not fear of failure. When I heard the question, this is back to what I asked 2 weeks ago when I gave you as a task to see if you could perceive of any possible activity that could happen within the scope of human involvement that could possibly present a danger to life. This is what they're referring to. When I heard the question about the possible threat to life, the only thing that came to my mind would be a kind of terminal boredom. All right, except this, there's a basis. I mean, that's not a bad observation. And I could say a lot about that, but I was going to use it for one particular thing that I'd already mentioned tonight. I could say, yeah, except for this, that life is too diverse to bore itself. But still, I wish more of you would try and realize this on your own, that this particular strength, the diversity, wherein life cannot bore itself. Areas of life can be bored because you can be bored. There can be whole groups of people. They can form boring clubs. They could have the bored anonymous. So there are definitely areas in life's body and areas in your body that can become extremely bored. The strength of diversity, what I want you to see, is still what ordinary consciousness is wont to refer to as evil, or that which should be brought more under control. But we have got to homogenize life, religiously, racially, politically, that is paradise. You know, if the humanist philosophy, I guess, nowadays would be, we've got to do it. Your forefathers' belief is, we all got to die, and then God will do it. But the very strength of this diversity is what ordinary consciousness sees as being some sort of hindrance. But were it not for such diversity, then what this person mused could happen. Life could go into terminal boredom. Because I'm sure in a group this size, there have been some of you that have just felt at times that life is just, you know, that some voice in you says, I can dig suicide. I can see how people do that. And you couldn't give any particular reason why. If a little genie or a spirit jumped up and said, wait, I heard that. What's troubling you, Bunky? And you went, well, nothing. You won't, what's the real problem? Well, nothing. Tell me what it is and I'll stop it for you. I can't tell you. I'm just bored. That which appears to be frightening, that which appears to be human behavior and thoughts of behavior out of control to ordinary level, is the strength of diversity. Without it, you would have paradise. Without it, you would have the binary human concept of paradise. You would have death. There is no resistance. There is no health. There is no conflict. There is no growth. There is no resistance. There is no life. What else would you call death except the ultimate boredom? Regarding your comments some weeks back or last week about the increasing tempo of the yellow circuit activity, a couple of weeks ago I was sitting at a computer and reflecting upon the ability of this little monster to do in a few minutes what only a few years ago would have taken days or weeks. And then I suddenly realized there was also a voice now in me that now complains about how slow this is. The astounding strength of life to grow. When I first saw this, I thought of how about another parable tonight? How about stock car racing? I did fencing, I'm sure. Regarding your comments some weeks back or last week about the increasing tempo of the yellow circuit activity, a couple of weeks ago I was sitting at a computer and reflecting upon the ability of this little monster to do in a few minutes what only a few years ago would have taken days or weeks. And then I suddenly realized there was also a voice now in me that now complains about how slow this is. The astounding strength of life to grow. When I first saw this, I thought of how about another parable tonight? How about stock car racing? I did fencing, I can sure as hell do stock car racing. It's just like these voices have the ability to almost instantaneously increase their speed just as soon as the time trials are posted. Don't have enough race car people? It's like take your voice, some of the voices in this case, about how marvelous it is computers can now in a second do what it would used to take me a week to do and then complain about it. The boy is this slow. Like take the voices, take human consciousness as being this little automobile that, as far as you know, it will only do 145 miles an hour. And you show up for the race, you get a chance for the big money, take all you got to qualify. In the time trials, the day or two before the race, they put everybody out to get the positions based on how fast you go. And as soon you get out and you qualify at 140.5 miles per hour, you get back in, you have a beer, you thank yourself and how great it is, and suddenly you look up and they post the next guy and he just did 150. The voices have the ability to say, wait a minute, and jump around the track and do 150. Were it not for that kind of resilience, were it not for that ability for things to move at a tempo that would seem to be almost astounding at this level, at this dimension, things could not grow. Back to one of my questions, you remember when I was asking you all to neuralize on your own, what is it, the purpose that life seems to have been served through religion? Person writes, one thing religion seems to do is to attempt to slow down the increasing pace of ordinary time. And what I was tempted to say was, must not I do the same thing? Or is it? Here's one I'm just going to read. I had been neuralizing myself and wondering how the extraction of AmV12 is related to the heating/cooling process you have spoken of. It seems to become clear to me in a new way this week that the heating and cooling process explains much about the way energy moves. The things that are taken personally from the line level down seem to be byproducts, thermodynamically speaking, of the heating-cooling of a given situation. When ordinary consciousness reacts, it takes the process apart and can only see things from the I process vantage point, which could be called the vanish point, since all chances of real understanding have then vanished. Then real acting would seem to me to be a heating up beyond the temperature required by life for that system. Dear Fata Morgana. Oh, Dr. Illusion again. Is innocence a lower circuit openness to things which progress finally to sophistication, which almost seems to be a form of cynicism? Is this part of what biochemically separates the serious from the absurd? All right. I like that, but let me add to it, since I never put it that way. It also separates the generations. It separates the young from the dead. Now I'd ask you, I would ask you again, who are you working for now? If you were suddenly, the totality of your perceptions and your consciousness, if you were life, how much would we all have to fear? How frantically would I be trying to get my hands about your throat? This is back to me asking that question that I finally answered last week, that I see absolutely no one made any comment written to me when I gave you the answer. But some of these I still wanted to read for various reasons. Back to the question of you trying to neuralize what possible activities might happen in the midst of humanity that could pose a threat to life's health and growth. And this person, I'm just going to read parts of it. If people stop believing in life, if people stop being dissatisfied, these two occurred to me as possible answers to your question. Then, like everything else, upon neuralizing, they seem to flip-flop and be upside down from a certain viewpoint. That is, a person in this thing sort of abandons life and then begins to actually believe in life for the first time. The effect is almost the opposite of an ordinary belief in life. Then this kind of belief, based upon the understanding of life's growth, causes you to cease to be dissatisfied with whatever happens. Yet you also become super dissatisfied with your ordinary condition. If people stop doing the things they do which serve life on the ordinary level, they could be serving life on a different level by not doing them. So these aren't answers, but I found them very interesting. I was trying to collect all the ones I marked with an F. That is not a grade, that means funny. I was going to save them all to the end. Some of you people's humor is getting out of hand. During all the time I've been here, you have given maps, tasks, suggestions, which when used were like keys to doors. My ordinary perception was not really aware of it. That is, of a key and a door and a turning and a passing through, etc. But then regarding last week's weapon you gave, it seems that you have not only given a key, but I found it to be a bazooka. Ye gods. As you should know, I did not read that in a self-serving manner, but I told you last week what I gave you. Anybody that doesn't make some kind of quantum jump with that, don't cry. How about get to the ones marked F? Dear Dr. Illusion, at the conclusion of a fight in a bricklayer's bar, is it proper to 1, have the winner buy a round, 2, have the loser buy a round, 3, seeing as how you've broken every bottle and glass in the joint, move on to where there might be more action? Dear Dr. Illusion, my husband is 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighs 275 pounds and beats me regularly. My question is, how can I get him to lose some weight? Well, here's one that I did overlook. It's not funny, but it's back to the person musing about possible examples of what might happen in the affairs of humanity that might pose a possible threat to life's growth. And they say, I could see in the following from a certain view as a possible threat. Worldwide literacy, one world government, full employment, universal language, no sexual taboos, and a religion that satisfied everyone. A story somebody relates to me from the paper that they read. A man claims, in Alabama as a matter of fact, to have invented a power generating device that puts out 25 times the electrical energy that it uses. And it seems from the article that Life disliked this idea so much that not only did the newspaper imply that he was a crackpot, but the patent office wouldn't even issue him a patent. Then they muse at the bottom, parenthetically, does anyone recognize a straight line possibility? Another one on what possible things might occur in the affairs of life that could pose a threat to life's continued health and growth. The big boys decide to cash in their winnings. Someone truly invents the free lunch. 3, it rains yachts and Porsches for 40 days and 40 nights. And lastly, dear sister, oh, it's Dr. Illusion again. I have recently decided to try bisexuality, but I'm a little confused and need advice. I can't decide which 2 sexes should I try first. All right, I've got 2 tasks for next week. One of them relates back to last week. I want everyone back to walking. I want everyone to go out twice in the next week and take one of those good 30 minutes, as private as possible walk. And for the 30 minutes, I want you to turn your awareness on stopping for the 30 minutes your vocal self in the running static, the yellow static daydreams. But to do it specifically, not only the weapon I gave you to use continually, but to go out and for the 30 minutes to walk that leisurely, private pace and to try within that time specifically to hold it for 30 minutes to stop all of the vocal self, stop all of you talking in daydreams. The second task is this, and listen quite simply. I want you to bring me next Thursday, everybody write it down on our regular little sheet of yellow paper so I can put them all together. You can wait until you get here. I want you to write me the title of a story. I want you to take as long as it takes, a story that you could get on one page, one full page typed or written, an 8.5 by 11. And I assume you know the kind of story that I would find and that you should find, without my criticism or my direction, that you would find apropos in some way connected to this, to your understanding of things unnatural, things above the line, or ordinary things seen from above the line. Is to have, don't write it, don't you write one word of it, but I want you, after fashioning and deciding upon the story, I want a title, and I want the title to be right at the heart of it. I want the title, as much as possible, to be fascinating, to be captious, even to me. But when you look at it, for you to be delighted, the relationship of that title in the story, and bring me just the title. And everyone bring the title and put your name on it. And Barbara, you'll be in charge of collecting them, separate from the questions next week. But I want that title to be a gem as far as you're concerned, and hopefully, as far as I would be concerned, even without seeing the story yet. For me, but just to see the title